Hey guys, tonight we delve deep, way back, into the cradle of civilization, to a time when the world was still yawning itself awake. We're off to ancient Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers. To explore the everyday rhythms of life, what people ate, what they wore, and how they managed to have a bit of fun when they weren't, inventing writing or building ziggurats. You're about to walk the dusty streets of cities like Ur and Babylon, long before they were just legendary names in a history book. Picture yourself there, the sun just beginning to paint the sky. The air thick with the smell of wood smoke and damp earth. You can almost hear the first bleating of goats and the distant murmur of voices. It's a world so removed from our own, yet humming with the same daily human dramas. Frankly, given the distinct lack of modern plumbing and antibiotics, you probably won't survive this. At least not with your current delicate sensibilities intact. But hey, that's what imagination is for, right? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe channel. History for sleep, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first hint of light, a fragile, pearly luminescence, is just beginning to seep over the flat horizon, pushing back the deep indigo of the Mesopotamian night. You stir. Not because of an alarm clock, those are millennia away, a fantastical dream nobody is yet capable of dreaming, but because of the subtle shift in the air, the distant, almost imperceptible sounds that signal the city of Ur is beginning to rouse itself. You're lying on a reed mat, perhaps a slightly thicker one if your family has a bit more status. Laid out on the cool, packed earth floor of your home. If you're among the majority, your house is a fairly simple affair, built from sun-dried mud bricks. These bricks, a true cornerstone of Mesopotamian life, pun absolutely intended, you're welcome, were made from the plentiful clay found between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Mixed with straw or animal dung for strength, and then left to bake hard under the relentless sun. Your walls are thick. Good for keeping out the worst of the summer heat and the surprising chill of winter nights. The roof above you is likely flat, made of wooden beams overlaid with reeds and mud. A space often used for sleeping during the hottest months, or for drying dates and other goods. There are no expansive glass windows, openings are small, designed more for ventilation than for views. Perhaps covered with a wooden lattice or a simple reed screen. Light is a precious commodity indoors. As you sit up, the air inside is still cool from the night. You might share this 1 or 2 room space with your entire immediate family, parents, siblings, maybe even a grandparent. Privacy, as we understand it, is a luxury yet to be widely invented. The concept of a personal bedroom? Hilarious. You'd be lucky to have a designated corner. A gentle snuffling sound from nearby reminds you that sometimes, if a prized goat or sheep was unwell or heavily pregnant, it might even share the indoor space for the night. Talk about a full house. Your first task, even before fully shaking off sleep, is likely related to hygiene, though it's a far cry from our morning showers. You might splash your face and hands with water from a clay jar, stored in a corner. This water was laboriously hauled from the nearby canals or the river itself, a daily chore, usually for the women and children of the household. Historians still argue whether the average Mesopotamian was more concerned with ritual purity or practical cleanliness when it came to their washing habits, but either way, water was essential. You wouldn't be reaching for a fluffy towel, a bit of air drying, or a rub-down with a piece of rough linen if you're fancy, would have to do. Now, if you were one of the truly impoverished, or perhaps lived in the marshy southern regions, your dwelling might be even simpler, a temporary structure made of bundled reeds, arched over to form a tunnel-like hut, plastered with mud. Surprisingly resilient, these sarifas were quick to build and rebuild, especially useful in areas prone to flooding. Imagine waking up with the scent of damp reeds and the lapping of water not too far from your doorstep. It's a bit like rustic camping, but, you know, it's your actual house. The sounds of the city are growing. A donkey brays somewhere down the narrow, winding alley that serves as your street. The alleyways of UR are unpaved, dusty in the dry season, and muddy when it rains. There's no organized sanitation system, so refuse, food scraps, broken pottery, and other household waste often ends up in the street or in designated refuse pits. If the neighborhood is particularly organized, the smell, let's be honest, would take some getting used to. Your modern nose would be in for a serious shock. One quirky tidbit is that street levels in ancient Mesopotamian cities gradually rose over centuries, as new layers of debris and rebuilt houses accumulated. You're literally walking on layers of history, and also, well, garbage. A dog barks. Dogs were common, kept for hunting, herding, and guarding. You might hear the lowing of cattle being driven out to pasture beyond the city walls, or the cooing of pigeons, which were kept for their meat and eggs. The first metallic clang of a coppersmith's hammer might ring out from a nearby workshop. Life in UR was a dense, communal experience. Your neighbors are close. Their lives intertwined with yours through shared walls, shared water sources, and shared alleyways. You know their business, they know yours. It's a bit like a modern apartment building, but with more mud and fewer noise complaints, mostly because there was no one to complain to. Your family begins to stir around you. A baby might start to cry, quickly attended to by its mother. Older siblings might be tasked with rekindling the embers of the previous night's fire in the small, clay hearth or outdoor bread oven, a tanner, the center of the household's culinary efforts. Smoke begins to curl from openings in roofs across the neighborhood, a visual signal that the city is truly coming alive. The mainstream historical fact is that Mesopotamian cities like UR were some of the earliest true urban centers in the world, bustling with tens of thousands of inhabitants even as far back as the 3rd millennium BCE. These weren't just villages, they were complex societies with organized labor, social hierarchies, and a vibrant, if somewhat odorous, daily life. You stretch, feeling the coolness of the morning on your skin. You're probably wearing a simple linen kilt or tunic, the same clothes you slept in. Laundry day wasn't a casual affair with a washing machine, it involved a trip to the river or canal, a lot of scrubbing with abrasive sand or perhaps some form of early soap made from ash and fat, and then laying garments out on bushes or rocks to dry. So, clothes were worn for multiple days, and personal aroma was distinct. The thought of the day ahead begins to form. If you're a young boy, you might be preparing for a day of learning at the Aduba, the tablet house, if your family can afford it and has aspirations for you to become a scribe. If you're a girl, your day will likely be filled with domestic chores, learning from your mother how to grind grain, bake bread, weave cloth, and manage a household, essential skills for your future. If you're an adult male, your occupation dictates your morning, a farmer heading to the fields outside the city walls, a craftsman to his workshop, a merchant to the marketplace, or perhaps a priest or temple worker preparing for morning rituals. But before any of that, there's the matter of the first meal of the day, and the preparation that entails. The sounds from your own small courtyard, if you have one, or the shared space around your home, increase. The rhythmic thud of a pestle in a stone mortar as grain is ground. The chatter of your mother discussing plans with a neighbor. The general hubbub of a world shaking off sleep and readying itself for the labors and small joys of another day under the Mesopotamian sun. The air is still relatively fresh, carrying the scent of damp earth, wood smoke, and perhaps the faintest hint of the distant, life-giving rivers. You take a deep breath. Another day in ancient UR has begun. And you're right in the thick of it, a tiny, living thread in the vast, ancient tapestry of human existence. The sun is climbing. Its rays now touching the tops of the taller mud brick houses and the distant, imposing silhouette of the city ziggurat, a man-made mountain dedicated to the city's patron deity. It's a constant reminder of the gods who watch over your life, and perhaps, if you're being cynical before your first beer of the day, the gods who demand a hefty portion of your hard-earned grain. The cool morning air you breathed in just moments ago is now starting to carry more distinct, and frankly, more appealing aromas than just damp earth and distant livestock. As you move from your sleeping mat, perhaps helping to roll it up and store it against a wall to free up precious living space, the promise of the first meal of the day. Your Mesopotamian morning munchies begins to dominate your senses. Your stomach, untroubled by late-night snacking on processed cheese curls, a distant, unimaginable horror, rumbles with honest hunger. The efforts of rekindling the hearth, whether it's a simple depression in the floor or a slightly more structured clay oven in your small courtyard, are now paying off. The soft glow of the fire is a welcoming sight, and the air around it is already warmer, tinged with the scent of burning dried reeds or scarce wood. Your mother, or perhaps an older sister, is likely already busy. The rhythmic grinding you heard earlier was the sound of barley or emmer wheat being processed. Forget your pre-packaged, quick-cook oatmeal, here. Making porridge is an art form born of necessity. The grain, stored in clay jars to protect it from pests, mostly, is first coarsely ground using a saddle quern, a large, slightly concave stone over which a smaller rubbing stone is pushed back and forth. It's hard work, often starting before dawn. And it's a sound that forms the daily soundtrack of every Mesopotamian household. You might even take a turn at the quern yourself if you're old enough, developing some serious arm muscles in the process. No need for a gym membership when your breakfast demands a pre-dawn workout. The most common breakfast, the fuel for your ancient Mesopotamian day, is a hearty porridge. This isn't some bland, watery gruel, well, not always. probably more akin to a modern near beer or a very light ale, making it a safer and more nutritious alternative to potentially contaminated water sources. A mainstream historical fact is that beer was a fundamental part of the Mesopotamian diet and economy. Workers often received daily rations of beer as part of their wages. Imagine your boss handing you a six-pack along with your paycheck. Different times, my friends, different times. So, you're sitting there, on the floor or perhaps on a low clay bench, with your bowl of porridge and your piece of flatbread, sipping your slightly sour, slightly lumpy beer. It's not a gourmet meal by 21st century standards, but it's warm, filling, and provides the energy needed for the day ahead. Around you, your family is doing the same. Conversation is likely practical, focused on the tasks of the day. There's a sense of shared purpose, of routine. Let's not forget the other bits and pieces that might grace a Mesopotamian breakfast table, depending on season and wealth. Fresh or dried figs, perhaps some roasted chickpeas, or even a few small, sun-dried fish if you lived near the rivers or canals and had a bit of luck. Milk, primarily from goats or sheep, was also consumed, though often in a fermented form like yogurt or a simple cheese, as fresh milk spoils quickly in the heat without refrigeration. Remember that refrigerator we don't have? Yeah, that complicates dairy. One quirky tidbit related to Mesopotamian food is the sheer variety of terms they had for different types of bread and beer, reflecting their importance. Dozens of types of bread are mentioned in cuneiform texts, categorized by their ingredients, shape, or method of preparation. It wasn't just bread, it was a whole universe of baked goods, each with its specific purpose and cultural significance. They took their carbs very seriously. The flavors are earthy, a little coarse, perhaps. The sweetness of the dates in your porridge is a welcome counterpoint to the slightly tangy beer. You eat slowly, deliberately. There's no rush to scroll through social media or catch a train. Your world is immediate, centered on this small circle of family and the sustenance before you. The sounds of the city, which you first heard as a distant murmur from your reed mat, remember that comfy setup from earlier, are now more insistent. The alley outside your door is busier. You can hear the calls of vendors who might be starting to make their rounds, perhaps selling vegetables or fresh river fish. Once the meal is finished, there's a quick cleanup. Clay bowls and cups are rinsed, perhaps with a bit of sand to scrub away residue if water is particularly scarce. Any leftover scraps of food are carefully saved, nothing goes to waste if it can be helped. Food security was a constant concern, so use it up, wear it out, make it do. Or do without philosophy was an unspoken rule. With breakfast settled, a new energy fills your small home. The sun is higher now, its light more direct, though still filtered through the narrow openings of your mud brick dwelling. The older members of the family are preparing to leave for their daily work, and you, depending on your age and role, will soon join the flow of life outside your doorstep. The city of Ur, now fully awake and fueled by its morning barley and beer, is ready to get down to business, and so are you. That humble meal, the porridge and bread, is the foundation upon which this complex, ancient society is built, one breakfast at a time. You feel a sense of readiness, a quiet understanding that your day, like the countless days of those who came before you in this very spot, is now truly underway. Now that you've had your fill of that hearty barley porridge and perhaps a swig or two of that breakfast beer we talked about, the one that's more nourishing than intoxicating, remember? You're feeling energized and ready to face the Mesopotamian day. Your footsteps, perhaps bare or clad in simple leather sandals if the ground is particularly rough or your family has a bit of means, lead you out of the familiar confines of your mud brick home and into the narrow, winding alleyways of Ur. The sun, climbing higher, casts sharp shadows, and the air, which was cool and carried the scent of wood smoke earlier, is now alive with 1,000 new smells and sounds. You're heading towards the heart of the city's daily clamor, the marketplace. Or as they might have called it, the karam, which often referred to the merchant quarter or quay area near the canals or river. As you get closer, the ambient noise swells from a general hum to a cacophony of voices, animal cries, and the sounds of commerce. Imagine a Black Friday sale, but it happens every day, and instead of flat-screen TVs, people are haggling fiercely over a sack of onions or a particularly fine piece of obsidian. You merge into a stream of people, women balancing baskets on their heads, farmers guiding donkeys laden with produce, craftsmen carrying their wares, and chattering groups of children darting underfoot, probably up to no good, as children have been since the dawn of time. The streets are thronged, and you have to navigate carefully to avoid bumping into a heavily laden porter or stepping on a stray goat that seems to believe it has the right of way. Personal space is, shall we say, a fluid concept here. The marketplace itself isn't a gleaming, organized mall with neat storefronts. It's more likely a sprawling open area, perhaps near the city gates or a major canal. Dusty and chaotic, with vendors setting up their stalls, often just a mat laid on the ground or a rickety wooden table, wherever they can find a spot. The air is thick with a heady mix of aromas. Pungent spices you can't quite name, freshly baked bread from a nearby stall, making you briefly nostalgic for your breakfast, the earthy smell of vegetables, the metallic tang of copper tools, the sweetness of dates and figs piled high, and the slightly rank odor of live animals, chickens clucking in wicker cages, sheep bleating nervously, and perhaps even a few grunting pigs. Though pork consumption varied in different periods and regions of Mesopotamia. You're here because your family needs something, or perhaps has something to trade. Remember, coined money as we know it is still far in the future. A mainstream historical fact is that early Mesopotamian economies operated primarily on a system of barter, or more accurately, a complex system of exchange based on set values of staple commodities, particularly barley and silver. So, while you might not be jingling coins in your pocket, you're acutely aware of the price of things in terms of how much barley it would take, or how many shekels of silver, a measure of weight, not a coin, something is worth. It's like everyone has a mental spreadsheet constantly running. Let's say your mother has sent you to acquire some fresh onions and perhaps a bit of fish if a good catch has come in from the river. You might be carrying a small sack of surplus barley that your family grew or received as wages, or perhaps some pottery your father crafted. Your task is to find a vendor willing to make a fair exchange. This is where the banter part comes in. Haggling is not just common, it's expected. It's a dance, a performance. You approach a farmer who has a colorful display of vegetables. He names his price for a string of onions, say, a certain measure of barley. You counter with a lower offer, perhaps pointing out a slight blemish on one of the onions or lamenting the poor quality of your own harvest. He scoffs, you sigh dramatically. It's all part of the game. A bit of friendly argument, some gesturing, maybe an appeal to the gods for fairness, and eventually, you settle on a quantity of barley that both parties can grudgingly agree on. It's a skill honed from a young age. No room for shyness in the Mesopotamian marketplace if you don't want to get fleeced. I bet even the quietest Mesopotamian kid could outsell a modern telemarketer after a few years of this. You see all sorts of goods on display. There are farmers from the surrounding countryside with their freshly harvested leeks, cucumbers, lentils, and chickpeas. Potters display their wares. From simple, functional bowls and jars like the ones you ate your porridge from, to more ornate painted vessels. Weavers offer lengths of woolen or linen cloth, perhaps dyed in vibrant colors using plant-based dyes, though the brightest and most color-fast hues are usually reserved for the wealthy. Toolmakers have bronze sickles, axes, and knives. There are sellers of reed mats, baskets, and ropes. Someone might be offering blocks of salt, a precious commodity brought from distant regions. You might even see luxury goods trickling in from far-off lands, lapis lazuli from the mountains of what is now Afghanistan, carnelian from the Indus Valley, or fine cedarwood from Lebanon. These items are usually destined for the temples or the elite, but it's fascinating to see the reach of Mesopotamian trade. One quirky tidbit is the use of cylinder seals. Many individuals, especially those involved in commerce or administration, would have a small, intricately carved stone cylinder, often made of semi-precious stone. When rolled across a damp clay tablet or a lump of clay sealing a jar or a door, it would leave a unique impression, acting as a signature or a mark of ownership. Imagine needing to authenticate a transaction for those onions. You might see the vendor and a more official record keeper impress their seals onto a small clay tablet noting the exchange, especially if it's part of a larger or more formal trade. It's like a tiny, rolling notary public. And some of the carvings are incredibly detailed and beautiful, miniature works of art for everyday bureaucracy. As you wander, looking for the fish vendor, you notice the presence of temple personnel. Temples in Mesopotamian cities were not just places of worship, they were also major economic institutions. They owned vast tracts of land, employed large numbers of people, and were involved in the production and redistribution of goods. Historians still argue about the precise extent to which the temple controlled the economy versus private enterprise, but their significant role is undeniable. You might see temple scribes meticulously recording deliveries of grain or livestock, or overseers managing temple-owned workshops that produce textiles or processed agricultural goods. Some of the larger transactions in the marketplace, especially those involving significant quantities of goods or land, might be witnessed or formally recorded by temple officials to ensure fairness and prevent disputes. They were the original big businesses, and probably had the cuneiform equivalent of a very stern accounting department. You finally spot the fish vendor, his stall near a canal offshoot, shaded by a makeshift awning of reeds. The smell is unmistakably fishy, but in a good, fresh way. He has a selection of river fish, perhaps carp or catfish, laid out on wet reeds. Again, the bartering process begins. Fish is a bit more perishable, so the negotiations might be quicker, the prices fluctuating more based on the day's catch. You examine the fish, checking for clear eyes and firm flesh. Skills your mother has drilled into you. You offer a small terracotta pot your father made, known for its sturdy craftsmanship. The fisherman inspects it, taps it, and after a bit of back and forth, you agree on an exchange for a decent-sized string of fish. Success. Your family will eat well tonight. The marketplace is also a social hub. People don't just come here to trade, they come to meet, to gossip, to hear news from travelers or from different parts of the city. You overhear snippets of conversation, complaints about the price of barley, news of a recent festival, rumors about a new decree from the palace, or perhaps hushed whispers about omens and portents. It's the city's information superhighway, long before fiber optics. You might bump into a cousin or a neighbor, exchange a few pleasantries, and share any interesting tidbits you've picked up. It's a vibrant, living organism, this marketplace, fueled by human need and human interaction. The sun is now higher and hotter. The initial bustle might be slightly subsiding as people complete their morning errands before the worst of the midday heat sets in. You carefully carry your newly acquired onions and fish, navigating your way back through the thinning crowds, your mind already anticipating the preparation of the evening meal. The experience of the carom lingers, the sights, the sounds, the smells. The subtle art of negotiation. It's a world away from clicking add to cart, a direct, sensory, and deeply human way of engaging with the economy and the community. You've played your small part in the intricate dance of supply and demand that keeps the city of UR alive and thriving, all before what we'd consider lunchtime. And you didn't even have to deal with a self-checkout machine. Small mercies, eh? Having successfully navigated the bustling marketplace, that chaotic symphony of smells and sounds we just waded through, and secured your onions and fish, you make your way back through the labyrinthine alleys of UR. The sun, as we've established, is making its presence known, and you're probably a little dusty from your commercial excursion. As you walk, or perhaps even back in the thick of the bazaar, you can't help but notice the people around you, not just what they're doing, but what they're wearing. Or, in some cases, what they're not wearing. Mesopotamian fashion, especially in the earlier Sumerian period, was often a masterclass in making the most of what you had. And it certainly wasn't about fast fashion or seasonal trends dropped by Instagram influencers. Let's start with the basics, with what you, an average inhabitant of UR, are likely sporting. If you're a man, the go-to garment for centuries, particularly in the hot climate, was a simple kilt or loincloth. This might be a length of woolen or linen fabric wrapped around your waist and secured with a belt or by tucking the ends in. Practical, breathable, and easy to make. Think less high-fashion runway, and more sensible everyday wear for getting things done. You might have slept in a similar garment, as we touched upon when you first woke on your reed mat. For laborers, farmers, and soldiers, this often remained the primary attire. It didn't get in the way, and goodness knows. You didn't want anything too cumbersome when you're knee-deep in an irrigation ditch or marching under the Mesopotamian sun. Women, in the earlier periods, often wore a similar wraparound skirt, sometimes extending higher to cover one shoulder, leaving the other bare. Or they might wear a simple, tunic-like dress, often rectangular pieces of fabric sewn together, perhaps with openings for the head and arms. The key materials were wool and linen. Wool came from the plentiful sheep that were a cornerstone of Mesopotamian agriculture. Remember those bleating sounds from the morning? Their wool was sheared, cleaned, spun into thread, and then woven into fabric. Linen, derived from the flax plant, was more labor-intensive to produce, requiring retting, scutching, and heckling of the flax fibers before spinning and weaving. Consequently, linen was generally considered a finer, more comfortable, and often more prestigious fabric, especially in the heat, as it's lighter and more breathable than wool. Think of wool as your everyday denim and linen as your breezy summer, well, linen. A mainstream historical fact is that Mesopotamian textiles were highly valued and became a significant export product, especially finely woven woolen cloth. But fashion isn't just about the clothes on your back. It's also about what's on your head, or rather, how you style what's on your head. Hairstyles and beards, for men, were surprisingly significant in Mesopotamia and could denote social status, ethnicity, or profession. Men, particularly those of higher status, are often depicted with long, elaborately curled hair and equally impressive square-cut or curled beards. We're talking intricate arrangements, possibly involving oils, resins, and even heated tongs, an early form of curling iron, perhaps, to achieve the desired effect. Assyrian kings, for example, are famous for their meticulously coiffed beards, which look like they required a team of stylists and several hours to perfect. It was a serious statement of power and masculinity. Think of it as the ancient world's most elaborate grooming ritual. You thought your beard oil routine was complex? Amateurs. Priests often had shaved heads, perhaps as a sign of purity or devotion. Conversely, slaves might have their heads shaved or marked in a particular way to indicate their status. Women's hairstyles also varied, from long and flowing to elaborately braided and pinned up, sometimes incorporating ribbons, beads, or metal ornaments. Headdresses and veils also appear, though the practice of veiling seems to have become more common in later Mesopotamian society and was often associated with marital status or social standing. And let's not forget jewelry. Mesopotamians, both men and women, loved their bling. Necklaces, bracelets, anklets, earrings, finger rings, and hair ornaments were common, made from a variety of materials. For the average person, these might be simple clay beads, shells, or polished stones. But for the wealthy, the wealthy had options. Gold, silver, electrum, a natural alloy of gold and silver, lapis lazuli, carnelian, agate, and jasper were fashioned into stunning and intricate pieces. The treasures found in the royal tombs of Ur, dating back to around 2600 BCE, showcase an astonishing level of craftsmanship. With elaborate headdresses made of gold leaves, intricate necklaces of lapis and carnelian, and gold daggers with lapis handles. These weren't just pretty trinkets. They were powerful symbols of wealth, status, and divine favor. One quirky tidbit is the apparent use of wigs or hair extensions. Some depictions and archaeological finds suggest that both men and women might have used artificial hair pieces to achieve those voluminous, elaborate hairstyles. So, if you were having a bad hair day in ancient Sumer, or your natural locks weren't quite up to the regal standard, you could always supplement. It's comforting to know that the desire for a fuller, more fabulous hairdo is a timeless human concern. So, as you return home with your provisions, shedding the dust of the marketplace, you might take a moment to adjust your own simple kilt or smooth down your practical, uncurled hair. You look around at your family. Your mother's hair might be neatly braided, her linen dress patched but clean. Your father's beard is probably trimmed for practicality rather than for show. Your attire is functional, suited to your life. It doesn't boast of great wealth, but it's appropriate for your place in the world. It tells a story of your environment, your resources, and the ancient traditions of your people. A style and substance shaped by the land between two rivers. And as you help put away the onions and fish, you might idly scratch your head, blissfully unaware of the centuries of scholarly debate that will one day dissect every fringe and tuft of your civilization's clothing choices. Alright, so you're back from the market, your humble abode now stocked with the day's essentials, those hard-won onions and fish we bartered for earlier. You've had a moment to consider your rather practical, if not exactly high-fashion, Mesopotamian attire, the simple linen or wool that keeps you decent and relatively cool. Life isn't just about sustenance and sensible skirts, though. As the day unfolds, another powerful force shapes your existence. A constant presence looming larger than even the mighty ziggurat you glimpse between the mud brick buildings, the gods. And with the gods come duties, rituals, and, thankfully for everyone's sanity, Some pretty decent parties, or as we might call them, religious festivals. You see, in Mesopotamia, the divine wasn't some abstract concept discussed only by philosophers in ivory towers. The gods were everywhere, in everything. Each city had its patron deity, Nana, or Sin, the moon god, famously watched over Uar, where you're currently hanging out. Then there was Inanna, Ishtar, goddess of love, fertility, and rather dramatically, war, Enlil, king of the gods, Enki, Ea, god of wisdom and freshwater, Utu, Shamash, the sun god and dispenser of justice. The list goes on. There was a god for just about everything, from brickmaking to beer brewing. Ninkasi, we salute you. This vast and often unpredictable pantheon needed to be kept happy. And keeping them happy was, quite literally, a full-time job for a significant portion of the population and a part-time concern for everyone else. Daily temple duties were a cornerstone of city life. Even if you aren't a priest or priestess, the temple's influence is inescapable. Remember those temple personnel we saw at the marketplace, keeping tabs on commerce? Their home base. The temple complex isn't just a place of worship, it's a sprawling economic and administrative hub. It's where the city's patron god or goddess was believed to literally reside, in statue form, within the innermost sanctum of the ziggurat or temple. This divine statue wasn't just a symbol, it was considered the living embodiment of the deity. And like any important resident, it needed daily care. Imagine the scene within the temple walls, areas generally off-limits to common folk like yourself, but whose activities ripple outwards. Each morning, priests and priestesses would perform elaborate rituals to awaken the god. The statue would be washed, anointed with fragrant oils. Remember those perfumes and cosmetics we'll touch on later? Dressed in fine garments, far more luxurious than your everyday loincloth, naturally, and presented with meals, twice a day, usually. Yes, the gods got breakfast and dinner. And it was top-notch stuff, the best cuts of meat, often from sacrificed animals, choice bread, cakes, fruit, and, of course, plenty of good quality beer and wine. It was like a divine room service. But with much higher stakes if you forgot the celestial equivalent of a sugar packet. The thinking was that a well-fed, well-cared-for god was a contented god. And a contented god was less likely to smite your city with famine, plague, or a particularly nasty flood from the Tigris or Euphrates. While you might not be directly involved in these elite temple rituals unless you're part of the clergy, your life is still about appeasing the deities on a more personal level. You might have a small shrine in your home, perhaps a niche in the wall with a clay figurine representing a household god or an ancestor. Here, you'd make small offerings, a pinch of flour, a libation of beer or water, a bit of incense made from aromatic plants. These everyday acts of piety were meant to ensure the well-being of your family, protect your home, and perhaps bring a bit of good luck in your daily endeavors. It's a bit like leaving cookies out for Santa, but with more immediate and potentially dire consequences if you forget. Then there were the public festivals, the gigs and gatherings of the ancient world, and these were a much bigger deal, involving the entire community. These were not solemn, quiet affairs. Mesopotamian religious festivals were often vibrant, noisy, and joyful celebrations, filled with music, feasting, and elaborate processions. A mainstream historical fact is that festivals like the Akitu, or New Year Festival, celebrated in Babylon and other cities, could last for several days and involved complex rituals, including the public parading of divine statues, reenactments of myths, and communal feasting. This was your ancient equivalent of a major holiday, a Super Bowl, and a massive street party all rolled into one. Picture it, the main streets of Uar, usually dusty and functional, are suddenly alive with color and sound. Processions of priests, musicians, and city dignitaries escort the statue of Nana, perhaps on a ceremonial barge if canals were involved, or carried aloft on a litter. The air is filled with the sound of harps, Lyres, a type of stringed instrument, drums, cymbals, and flutes. People lined the streets, cheering, singing, and perhaps throwing flowers or offering prayers as the god passes by. There would be chanting, hymns sung in praise of the deity, and maybe even dramatic performances recounting sacred stories. It's a chance for the whole community to come together, to reaffirm their collective identity and their relationship with their divine protector. And yes, there was usually a lot of food and beer involved. The offerings made to the gods in the temple were often redistributed to the temple staff and, during festivals, to the wider populace. So, it was a holy day, but also a day for a good meal and a bit of revelry. Waste not, want not, especially when divine leftovers are on the menu. Music was an integral part of these gatherings, and indeed, of many aspects of Mesopotamian life. We find depictions of musicians and instruments on cylinder seals, reliefs, and inlaid objects like the famous standard of Ur, which you might recall from history books. They had string instruments like harps and lyres of various sizes, some small enough to be carried, others large, ornate, and probably played in temple orchestras. Percussion was provided by drums, tambourines, and cymbals. Wind instruments included reed pipes and flutes. Music wasn't just for religious ceremonies, it was also part of courtly entertainment, private celebrations, and even, some scholars suggest, used to accompany work or to soothe the sick. Historians still argue about what exactly Mesopotamian music sounded like, as their system of notation, if one existed widely, is not fully understood. However, from the variety of instruments and the lyrical quality of surviving hymns and poems, it's clear music played a vital role in their culture. It set the mood, told stories, and connected people to each other and to the divine. One quirky tidbit regarding religious practice is the concept of substitute kings. In times of perceived great danger, often predicted by ominous celestial events, we'll get more into stargazing later, a ritual could be performed where a temporary, substitute king was appointed. This unfortunate individual, often a criminal or someone considered expendable, would take on the symbolic role of the true king, bearing the brunt of any divine wrath or evil foreseen in the omens. After a set period, the substitute king was often ritually killed, thereby, in theory, diverting the disaster from the actual ruler and the kingdom. Talk about taking one for the team. It's a rather grim example of how seriously they took omens and the lengths they'd go to appease what they perceived as angry gods. Probably not a gig you'd volunteer for at the job fair. Beyond the grand public festivals, smaller, more personal gigs might happen. Perhaps a neighborhood shrine is having a special observance, or a family is celebrating a birth or a marriage with music and feasting on a smaller scale. The streets themselves could become impromptu stages for storytellers or traveling musicians. Life wasn't all drudgery and appeasing grumpy deities, there was room for joy, for communal expression, for the simple pleasure of a shared song or a well-told story. So, as the afternoon wears on in your Mesopotamian life, the rhythms of the temple and the anticipation of future festivals are woven into the fabric of your day. You might hear the distant sound of temple chants or the practice of a musician in a nearby courtyard. You understand that your well-being, the fertility of your fields, if you're a farmer, the success of your craft, even the continued existence of your city, are all tied to this complex relationship with the unseen world of gods and spirits. It's a worldview that imbues every aspect of life with a sense of the sacred, making even the most mundane tasks part of a larger cosmic drama. And while some of the rituals might seem strange or even a bit terrifying from our modern perspective, they provided a sense of order, meaning, and community in a world that was often unpredictable and harsh. Plus, who doesn't love a good parade with free food? The echoes of temple chants and the imagined vibrancy of those grand religious festivals we were just discussing still linger in your mind. You've seen how the gods and their earthly representatives, the priests and priestesses, play a massive role in the daily life and economy of Ur. But who keeps track of all those divine offerings, the temple inventories, the royal decrees, the legal contracts? And even those epic tales of gods and heroes? It's not the head priest, busy with anointing statues, nor the king, occupied with, well, kingly things. No, for that, you need a specialist. Someone whose currency is not barley or silver, but symbols meticulously pressed into clay. You need a scribe. And their work, my friend, is literally about scratching out a living. Imagine, for a moment, that your family has aspirations for you. Perhaps they've scrimped and saved. Or maybe you've shown a particular aptitude for memorization and a tolerance for sitting still, a rare commodity in any era. The path of a scribe, while arduous, offers a way out of manual labor. A step up the social ladder, and a position of considerable importance in Mesopotamian society. So, instead of heading to the fields or a craftsman's workshop after your morning beer and barley, you might find yourself trundling off to the Aduba, the tablet house. This is the Sumerian equivalent of school, and it's where young boys, and, very rarely, girls, usually from elite families or destined for specific temple roles, endured a grueling education to master the art of cuneiform writing. Don't picture a bright, airy classroom with colorful posters and interactive whiteboards. The Aduba was likely a modest building, perhaps attached to a temple or a private house, where students sat on clay benches, diligently working with their lumps of wet clay and reed styluses. The curriculum was, to put it mildly, intense. A mainstream historical fact is that cuneiform, one of the earliest known systems of writing, involved hundreds of complex signs. These weren't simple alphabetic letters like we use, they were wedge-shaped impressions, hence, cuneiform. From the Latin cuneus for wedge, that could represent whole words, syllables, or determinatives, signs indicating the category of a word. Learning all of these, and how to form them correctly and quickly, took years of relentless practice. Think of it as learning Mandarin, ancient Greek, and advanced calculus all at once. And your teacher is probably armed with a cane and not afraid to use it for motivational purposes. Your school day Now, about those cylinder seals we mentioned back in the marketplace. Scribes often played a role in their creation or use, as seals were integral to authenticating documents. A scribe might draft a contract on a clay tablet, and then the parties involved would roll their personal cylinder seals across it as a legally binding signature. The scribe might also add a colophon, a short inscription at the end of a text giving details like the scribe's name, the date, and perhaps the source of the text copied. It was a way of taking pride in their work, and sometimes, ensuring they got credit, or blame, if they made a mistake. One quirky tidbit is that scribal schools often had a rather colorful vocabulary for students who weren't, shall we say, top of the class. You might be called a dullard or told your handwriting looked like the tracks of a crawling snake. The pressure was immense, and the dropout rate was probably pretty high. It wasn't a career path for the faint of heart or the easily distracted. They didn't have social media to distract them. But I imagine a particularly interesting beetle crawling across the floor could derail an entire afternoon of cuneiform practice. Historians still argue about the literacy rates in ancient Mesopotamia. While scribes were obviously literate, it's debated how widespread basic literacy was among the general population. Some scholars believe it was largely confined to professional scribes and the elite, while others suggest that a more rudimentary level of literacy might have been more common, especially among merchants or craftsmen who needed to keep simple records. Regardless, the ability to read and write cuneiform was a specialized skill that commanded respect. So, if you're that young student at the Aduba, your hands are perpetually stained with clay, your knuckles sore from the stylus, or the cane, and your head swimming with hundreds of signs. But with each perfectly formed wedge, you're one step closer to a life of influence and relative comfort. You might dream of becoming a royal scribe, penning letters for the king, or a temple scribe, managing the vast wealth of the gods. Or perhaps you'll specialize in mathematics, medicine, or law. The possibilities, once you've mastered that pesky cuneiform, were considerable. Even if you're not a scribe, you interact with their work constantly. That legal document settling a dispute over water rights for your family's field? Drafted by a scribe. The hymn being chanted in the temple? Copied and preserved by generations of scribes. The story of Gilgamesh searching for immortality that a traveling storyteller might recount in the evening? It exists because scribes painstakingly recorded it on clay tablets. Their silent, diligent work underpins the entire complex structure of Mesopotamian civilization. From the grand pronouncements of kings to the everyday transactions of the marketplace. They are the unsung heroes, scratching away in the dust and heat, ensuring that the words, laws, and stories of their world would not be entirely lost to the relentless march of time. And you, whether you become one or just benefit from their services, are living in a world shaped by their styluses. Whether you've spent your morning hunched over a clay tablet at the Aduba, enduring the stern gaze of your Ummiyah and trying to get your wedges just right. Or perhaps you've been hauling goods down at the bustling Karam, or even toiling in the sun-baked fields beyond the city walls, the Mesopotamian sun by midday is becoming a formidable opponent. It beats down relentlessly, baking the mud brick walls of Ur and turning the narrow alleyways into veritable ovens. The energetic clamor of the early morning, the market bargaining we dove into, the diligent scratching of styluses, it all begins to slow. A hush, or at least a significant decrescendo, falls over the city as its inhabitants wisely seek shelter and a bit of a break. It's time for your midday repast and the culturally ingrained, utterly necessary siesta. Unlike that hearty barley porridge and beer combo that kicked off your day, remember that kickstart? The midday meal is generally lighter. Think less full-on feast and more of a substantial snack to tide you over until the evening. Heavy food and intense heat are not a recipe for productivity. Or comfort for that matter. You wouldn't want to be wrestling with a massive leg of lamb and then immediately attempt to decipher complex omens or haul another load of barley. Your body, and indeed the collective wisdom of Mesopotamian society, dictates a more sensible approach. So, what's on the menu for this Mesopotamian lunch break? It's likely to be something that requires minimal preparation, or perhaps leftovers from the morning's efforts. More of that versatile flatbread, a staple at almost every meal, would certainly make an appearance. You might have it with a handful of dates or figs, providing a quick source of energy and sweetness. Perhaps some fresh vegetables if they are in season and readily available, cucumbers, radishes, or spring onions, things that offer a bit of crunch and hydration. If your family had a successful fishing trip or market run, like your onion and fish haul from earlier, though that's likely destined for a more substantial evening meal, you might have a small piece of grilled or dried fish. Cheese, a simple, fresh type made from goat or sheep milk, could also be part of this lighter fare, perhaps crumbled onto your bread. Olives, if available, though more common in regions to the west, they did make their way to Mesopotamia, might add a salty tang. And to drink? More beer, of course. Though again, this is the relatively low alcohol, nourishing variety, serving as much for hydration and calories as for any kind of midday buzz. Or just plain water. Carefully drawn from the well or canal and stored in porous clay jars that help keep it surprisingly cool through evaporation. Forget your iced lattes or sugary sodas, this is hydration. Ancient style. This meal isn't usually a big family sit-down affair like breakfast might have been, or dinner will be. It's often eaten more individually, wherever you happen to be when the heat peaks. If you're a laborer in the fields, you might find a sliver of shade under a date palm. If you're a craftsman, you might just pause in your workshop. If you're that diligent scribe in training, you might munch on your bread and dates in a quiet corner of the adobe courtyard before the big brother spots you and assigns more signs to memorize. The point is to refuel quickly and then get out of the sun. Which brings us to the siesta. A mainstream historical fact is that in many ancient, and modern, cultures in hot climates, taking a break during the hottest part of the day was, and is, standard practice. Mesopotamia was no exception. From roughly noon until mid-afternoon, when the sun is at its most ferocious, the city of Ur would quiet down significantly. Shops might close, work in the fields would pause, and even the normally bustling temple precincts would see reduced activity. It's a communal acknowledgement that sometimes, the best way to deal with an overwhelming force of nature like the Mesopotamian sun is simply to surrender to it for a few hours. Where do you take this siesta? If you're at home, you'd retreat into the relative coolness of your mud brick house. Remember those thick walls and small windows we talked about when you first woke up? They come into their own now, helping to keep the interior significantly cooler than the blazing outdoors. You might unroll your reed mat in the shadiest part of the room and lie down for a nap. If your house has a flat roof and it's constructed sturdily enough, and perhaps there's a makeshift awning of reeds for shade, it could actually be a breezy spot to catch some rest, assuming you don't mind the occasional pigeon trying to share your nap space. It's not about luxury, it's about survival and conserving energy. Try doing heavy manual labor or complex mental tasks when it's 45 degrees Celsius, that's about 113 Fahrenheit for those of you still on Imperial, in the shade. Your output, and your sanity, would plummet. The Mesopotamians were nothing if not practical. This midday pause also offers a subtle glimpse into social stratification. While almost everyone would try to avoid strenuous activity during peak heat, the quality of your siesta spot could vary wildly. If you are from a wealthy family, your house might be larger, with more rooms, perhaps even a central courtyard with a tree or a small pool of water, creating a cooler microclimate. You might have finer mats or even a wooden bed frame with a woven base to lie on. Servants might fan you or bring you cool water. Think of it as the difference between trying to nap on a park bench on a sweltering day versus chilling in an air-conditioned lounge. Both are avoiding work, but the comfort levels are worlds apart. For the poorest, the siesta might be taken in whatever shade they can find, huddled against the wall of a larger building, under a sparse tree, or even within the cooler darker recesses of a temple gateway if permitted. It's a stark reminder that while the sun beats down on everyone equally, the ability to mitigate its effects is not equally distributed. Historians still argue about the precise daily schedules and labor conditions for different classes in Mesopotamian society, but the need for a midday respite from the heat was a common denominator, even if the quality of that respite differed. One quirky tidbit relates to how Mesopotamians might have tried to keep cool beyond just seeking shade. While they didn't have electric fans or AC, they understood the principles of evaporation. Sprinkling water on the floors of their homes would create a cooling effect as it evaporated. They also knew the value of staying hydrated and probably wore loose-fitting clothing, like those linen shifts we discussed, to allow for air circulation. Some tomb paintings from nearby Egypt, a contemporary civilization, show people being fanned with large palm fronds, a low-tech but effective way to create a breeze. While we don't have as many visual depictions from Mesopotamia for this specific activity, it's reasonable to assume similar simple methods were employed by those who could afford such personal service. Perhaps you could get your younger sibling to fan you by promising them an extra date. Good luck with that negotiation. As the worst of the heat begins to subside, usually by mid to late afternoon, the city slowly starts to stir back to life. The sounds of workshops resume. Farmers might head back to their fields for a few more hours of work in the cooler part of the day, and the scribal students at the Adaba would be roused for another session of tablet thumping. That midday pause, that simple meal and quiet rest, is crucial. It breaks the long day into manageable parts and allows people to work efficiently when conditions are more favorable. It's a rhythm of life dictated by the environment, a smart adaptation to a challenging climate. So, as you blink the sleep from your eyes after your own siesta, feeling refreshed and ready for the remainder of the afternoon, you are partaking in an ancient tradition. A quiet little ritual of rest that has allowed civilizations to thrive in some of the hottest places on Earth. And you didn't even need to set an alarm to wake up. The shifting angle of the sun and the subtle change in the ambient temperature would be your natural cue. Feeling refreshed from your siesta, that essential midday pause we just navigated, you step back out into a city that is gradually shaking off its heat-induced slumber. The sun, though still powerful, has lost its tyrannical midday ferocity, and a renewed sense of purpose hums through the alleyways of UR. If you listen carefully, you can hear it, the rhythmic clang of hammers, the whir of a potter's wheel, the steady thud of a weaver's loom. This is the sound of Mesopotamian industry getting back to work. The artisans and craftsmen in their workshops forming the skilled backbone of the city's economy. Let's take a stroll down what we might call artisan alleys, and peek into these hives of creativity and production. These workshops aren't typically located in grand, purpose-built industrial parks. More often, they are integrated into the fabric of the city. Clustered in certain neighborhoods, perhaps with similar crafts grouped together. You might find a row of potters here, a street of weavers there. The coppersmiths a little further off, probably to keep the noise and smoke slightly contained, though zoning laws weren't exactly a thing. The workshops themselves are often modest. Perhaps a room in the craftsman's own house that opens onto the street, or a small, dedicated structure in a courtyard. First, let's stop by a potter's workshop. The smell of damp clay is pervasive and earthy. You see the potter, a figure of intense concentration, sitting at a low, hand-turned wheel. Or perhaps a more advanced kick wheel if the workshop is a bit more prosperous. His hands, slick with a slurry of clay and water, expertly coax a shapeless lump into a graceful jar, a sturdy bowl. Or one of the ubiquitous beveled rim bowls that archaeologists find in such vast quantities. Seriously, they made millions of these, possibly as standardized ration containers. A mainstream historical fact is that the potter's wheel was a Mesopotamian invention, appearing as early as the 4th millennium BCE, revolutionizing pottery production by allowing for faster, more uniform, and more complex shapes. Before this, all pottery was hand-built, a much slower process. Around the workshop, you see various stages of production. Clay, dug from the riverbanks or nearby pits, is first cleaned of impurities, a mucky, laborious job, often done by apprentices. Then it's kneaded, like dough, to remove air bubbles and achieve the right consistency. You see finished pots drying in the sun, waiting to be fired. The kiln, probably a domed structure made of mud brick, is where the magic happens, transforming fragile clay into durable ceramic through the intense heat of a carefully controlled fire. Firing pottery is a skilled art in itself. Too little heat and the pots are weak, too much and they can crack or warp. The potter needs to understand his clay, his kiln, and the mysteries of fire. You might see him expertly stacking the kiln, arranging the dried pots to allow for even heat circulation. It's a bit like an ancient, high-stakes game of Jenga before you turn up the heat to 1,000 degrees Celsius. The range of pottery is astonishing, from simple, undecorated vessels for everyday use, like the ones you used for your porridge and beer this morning, remember those? To more elaborate pieces decorated with incised patterns, painted designs, or applied ornamentation. These finer wares might be destined for the temple, the palace, or for wealthier households. Every household needs pottery, for storing grain, water, and beer, for cooking, for eating and drinking. The potter is an essential craftsman, his work underpinning daily life. Now, let's move on. A little further down the alley, where the rhythmic clang-clang thump tells you a metallurgist is at work. This workshop is hotter, filled with the roar of a furnace and the sharp scent of burning charcoal and molten metal. Here, craftsmen are working with copper and, later, bronze, an alloy of copper and tin. Tin was not locally available in Mesopotamia and had to be imported from distant lands, like modern-day Afghanistan or Turkey, making bronze a more valuable and prestigious material. You see an apprentice vigorously working a pair of bellows, probably made of animal skins, to force air into the furnace, raising the temperature high enough to melt the metal ores. The master smith, his face grimy and streaked with sweat, carefully pours the glowing, molten metal from a crucible into a clay or stone mold. Sparks fly, and the heat guilds. There's evidence that craftsmen in similar trades often lived and worked in the same areas and may have had some level of organization to control quality, training, and perhaps even prices. Historians still argue about the exact nature and extent of these early craft organizations, but it suggests a sense of professional identity and shared interest among these skilled workers. It's like the ancient version of a union, but probably with more ceremonial beer. Beyond these big three, pottery, metallurgy, and weaving, there were countless other skilled artisans. Carpenters and woodworkers crafted furniture, though wood was a relatively scarce and prized commodity in much of Mesopotamia, doors, and chariot wheels. Stonecutters shaped stone for statues. Cylinder seals, those personal signature stamps, and building foundations. Jewelers meticulously worked gold, silver, and precious stones into the stunning adornments favored by the elite. Leatherworkers tanned hides to make sandals, bags, and components for chariots and armor. Reed workers wove mats, baskets, and even built those simple sarifa houses we encountered earlier. Each craft had its own set of specialized skills, tools, and traditions, passed down from master to apprentice, often within families, for generations. These artisans were not just producing functional objects, they were also creating items of beauty and cultural significance. The skill and artistry evident in many Mesopotamian artifacts. From intricately carved cylinder seals to gleaming gold jewelry from the royal tombs of Ur, speak to a sophisticated aesthetic sense and a high level of technical mastery. They were the backbone of the urban economy, providing the goods that people needed for daily life, for their religious practices, and for the expression of status and power. Their workshops, humming with activity in the afternoon sun, are a testament to human ingenuity and the enduring drive to create, to shape the raw materials of the world into objects of use and beauty. As you walk away from these alleys, the blended sounds of their labor, the potter's wheel, the smith's hammer, the weaver's loom, provide a comforting rhythm to the city's afternoon. A steady beat of productivity and skill. The sounds of the artisan alleys, the potter's wheel, the smith's hammer, the weaver's shuttle, begin to fade as you move towards a different, more imposing part of the city. You've seen where the everyday goods and even some of the finer crafts are made. Now, let's imagine you have a reason, or perhaps the rare privilege, to venture near or even within the very epicenter of power in Ur, the royal palace. This isn't just the king's house, it's a sprawling complex, a city within a city. Teeming with its own intricate routines, hierarchies, and, of course, its fair share of secrets. Life here is a world away from the dusty workshops or the simple mud brick homes of the general populace. As you approach, the scale of the architecture alone is designed to impress, and perhaps intimidate. Unlike your humble dwelling, the palace walls are likely thicker, the bricks possibly finer, maybe even incorporating some of those expensive imported baked bricks or decorative glazed elements if it's a later period or a particularly prosperous reign. Guards, stern-faced and armed with spears or maces, would be stationed at the imposing gateways. Not just anyone can wander in, access is strictly controlled. Even getting close might require a legitimate reason. Perhaps you're delivering high-quality textiles from a weaver's workshop, remember those beautiful fabrics we just saw being made? Or a finely crafted piece of jewelry destined for a royal lady. Let's say, just for tonight's journey, you have a minor role, perhaps as an assistant to a more important functionary, granting you a glimpse beyond the outer courtyards. The air inside the palace complex feels different. It's still busy, but it's an organized, hierarchical bustle. You're no longer in the relatively freewheeling environment of the marketplace. Here, every movement seems to have a purpose, every person a defined role. You see officials striding purposefully, scribes rushing past with clay tablets clutched to their chests, probably carrying very important royal correspondence, not just practicing their wedges, servants hurrying on errands. And perhaps even foreign envoys waiting for an audience, looking suitably impressed or nervously sweating in their unfamiliar attire. The daily routines within the palace are a complex ballet of service and administration. At the very top, of course, is the king, the lugal, literally big man, in Sumerian, or Saru in Akkadian. He's not just a political leader, he's also the chief priest, the supreme judge, and the military commander. His day would be packed with audiences, receiving reports from governors and generals, consulting with advisors, presiding over legal cases, and participating in religious rituals to ensure the favor of the gods, because a happy god means a happy kingdom, remember? A mainstream historical fact is that Mesopotamian rulers were considered to be divinely appointed, acting as the gods' representatives on earth. This divine mandate gave them immense authority, but also immense responsibility for the well-being of their people. If things went badly, famine, military defeat, the king's relationship with the gods might be questioned. No pressure, then. Surrounding the king is a vast retinue. There are high officials, the vizier or chief minister, who manages the day-to-day affairs of the state, the treasurer, overseeing the royal finances, which are considerable, drawn from taxes, tribute, and the produce of royal lands, and various courtiers, advisors, and administrators. Each of these individuals would have their own staff, their own offices within the palace complex, and their own sphere of influence. Imagine a very ancient, very elaborate version of a presidential cabinet, but with more impressive beards and probably better curses and hexes department for dealing with troublesome neighbors. Then there are the servants. An army of them, catering to every conceivable need of the royal family and the palace elite. Cooks in the palace kitchens prepare elaborate meals, far more varied and luxurious than your daily barley porridge, using the finest ingredients, including meats, exotic fruits, and wine. Remember those temple offerings? The palace cuisine would be similarly high-end. There are cupbearers, a surprisingly important and trusted position, as they could prevent poisoning, chamberlains, grooms for the royal stables, launderers, cleaners, and countless others. Life as a palace servant might offer a degree of security and access to better food than the average person. But it also meant long hours, strict rules, and being constantly under the watchful eyes of superiors. One misstep could lead to severe punishment. It's the original, upstairs, downstairs, drama, but with cuneiform complaint forms. For women in the palace, life was often centered around the queen and the royal harem. The queen could be a powerful figure in her own right, with her own estates, staff, and political influence. The harem was not just a collection of wives and concubines, it was a complex social unit, often including female relatives of the king, female attendants, weavers, and other craftswomen producing luxury goods for the palace. Historians still argue about the level of autonomy and political power wielded by royal women in Mesopotamia, with some evidence suggesting certain queens and princesses played very significant roles, while others were more secluded. Life in the palace wasn't just about drudgery and administration. It was also the center of culture and entertainment. The king and his court would enjoy music and dancing. Remember those lyres and harps from the festival discussion, poetry recitations, and lavish banquets. Royal hunts were a popular pastime for rulers, demonstrating their prowess and courage. The palace would also house libraries of clay tablets, like the famous library of Ashurbanipal in Nineveh, containing literary works, scholarly texts, and historical records, carefully curated by royal scribes. But with such proximity to power comes peril. The palace could be a hotbed of intrigue, rivalry, and ambition. Courtiers vied for royal favor, factions formed, and conspiracies could simmer beneath the surface of polite courtly etiquette. A careless word, a perceived slight, or backing the wrong horse in a succession dispute could lead to demotion, exile, or worse. The stakes were incredibly high. If you were in the inner circle, you had access to immense power and wealth. If you fell out of favor, you could lose everything, including your life. It's a bit like a reality TV show, but the "you're fired" moment could involve an actual axe. One quirky tidbit is the role of royal messengers. These individuals were vital for communication across the vast Mesopotamian kingdoms and empires. They would travel long distances, often on foot or by donkey, carrying clay tablets inscribed with official orders or intelligence, sometimes encased in clay envelopes for security. These envelopes would often be impressed with the sender's cylinder seal, and breaking the seal was a serious offense. Imagine being the guy who has to deliver bad news to a famously short-tempered king after a 10-day journey through bandit-infested territory. You'd want hazard pay and a very fast donkey for the return trip. So, as you, in your minor role, observe the comings and goings within the palace walls, you get a sense of a highly organized, powerful, and somewhat intimidating world. The luxury is palpable: fine furnishings, decorated walls, the rustle of expensive garments, the scent of incense and perfumes. But beneath the glittering surface, there's a constant undercurrent of protocol, ambition, and the ever-present weight of royal authority. It's a world that sustains the craftsmen whose workshops you just visited, commissioning their finest work, but it's also a world that operates by its own strict rules, where the favor of the king is paramount, and the whispers in the corridors can be as potent as any royal decree. As the afternoon deepens and preparations for the evening's activities begin within the palace, you might feel a slight shiver, a mixture of awe and perhaps a little relief that your own life, while humbler, is probably a good deal less stressful. Leaving the imposing, perfumed, and slightly unnerving atmosphere of the royal palace precincts behind, mentally, of course, unless you actually had that delivery to make. You find yourself back in the more familiar, less fraught environment of UR's residential lanes. The late afternoon sun casts longer shadows now. And while adults are still engaged in their various labors or beginning to think about the evening meal, another distinct sound often fills the air in these less formal spaces: the shouts, laughter, and chants of children. After peeking into the high-stakes world of kings and courtiers, let's turn our attention to the smaller citizens of Mesopotamia, to their games, their toys, and what childhood might have been like in this ancient land. Forget organized playdates scheduled via WhatsApp groups or elaborate electronic toys with blinking lights and annoying jingles. Mesopotamian childhood, especially for those not destined for the grueling life of a scribe at the Aduba, which we've already established was no picnic, was likely a more rough and tumble, imaginative affair, played out in the dusty alleyways, courtyards, and open spaces of the city. You'd see them, gangs of children of various ages, their energy seemingly inexhaustible despite the day's heat having only recently subsided. What kind of games did they play? Well, children are inventive creatures, and many of their games were probably timeless classics that require little more than a bit of space and imagination. Running games like tag, or catch me if you can, were almost certainly popular. What kid doesn't like a good chase? Hide and seek amongst the nooks and crannies of the mud brick houses and narrow streets would have been a natural fit. They might have played hopping games, perhaps with squares scratched into the dirt, a precursor to hopscotch. We find small, knucklebones, astragali, usually from sheep or goats, in archaeological contexts, which were used in games of chance or skill, much like jacks or dice, for millennia across many cultures. Rolling hoops, perhaps made from bent reeds or wood, with a stick to guide them, is another activity depicted in some ancient art and likely enjoyed by Mesopotamian kids. It's the ancient equivalent of a remote-controlled car, but with more cardio involved. Toys were generally simple and often homemade. Clay, being so abundant, was a favorite material. Little hands would shape crude animal figurines, sheep, goats, donkeys, dogs, or small human figures. Archaeologists have found many such simple clay toys, often sun-dried rather than properly fired, suggesting they were made by children themselves or for them with little fuss. Think of them as ancient action figures or dollhouse occupants, ready for whatever adventures a child's mind could conjure. Small wheeled carts or chariots made of clay or wood, pulled along with a string, were also popular, especially for boys. Mimicking the adult world of transport and warfare. Girls might have had dolls made of wood, cloth, or clay, perhaps with scraps of fabric for clothes, learning nurturing roles through play. It's a bit like those gendered toy aisles today, but with more mud and fewer choking hazard warnings. Board games were also a feature of Mesopotamian life, enjoyed by adults and likely children too. A mainstream historical fact is the discovery of the royal game of Ur, a beautifully inlaid board game found in the royal tombs of Ur, dating back to around 2600 BCE. While this lavish example was clearly for the elite, simpler versions, perhaps just lines scratched onto a clay tablet or a flat stone, with pebbles or seeds for pieces, would have been accessible to more people. The rules of the royal game of Ur were a mystery for a long time, but thanks to a cuneiform tablet deciphered by British Museum curator Irving Finkel, we now have a good idea of how it was played. It's a race game, a bit like backgammon, involving strategy and luck. Imagine families gathering in the cooler evening to play such a game. The children learning from the adults, a timeless scene of shared leisure. Beyond physical games and toys, storytelling, songs, and riddles would have played a huge part in a child's world. In a largely non-literate society, unless you were one of those scribal prodigies, oral traditions were incredibly strong. Children would learn the myths, legends, and folk tales of their people by listening to older family members or traveling storytellers. They'd learn nursery rhymes, work songs, and simple chants, much like children do today. Historians still argue about the specific content and nature of children's oral literature in Mesopotamia, as much of it wouldn't have been written down. But snippets in proverbs and other texts give us clues that they had a rich verbal playground. What about early education for those not heading to the Adaba? For most children, education was informal and practical, learned by observing and imitating their parents and older siblings. Boys would learn their father's trade, farming, pottery, smithing. Whatever it might be, by starting with simple tasks and gradually taking on more responsibility. Girls would learn domestic skills from their mothers, grinding grain, remember that morning routine? Baking bread, weaving, the Tigris and the Euphrates. Mesopotamia, after all, means the land between the rivers. And you can't understand daily life here without understanding the profound, dual role these waterways play, as both incredible blessings and, at times, terrifying burdens. As the late afternoon sun begins its slow descent, painting the sky with those soft, pre-dusk colors, you might find yourself drawn towards the banks of a major canal. Or perhaps even the Euphrates itself if yours layout allows such a contemplative stroll. The air here is different, cooler, carrying the damp, loamy scent of the water and the vegetation that clings to its edges. You see fishermen in small, curious-looking boats returning with their day's catch, perhaps some of the carp or catfish that might end up in your evening meal if you're earlier bartering at the market. Remember those fish you got for a pot? Hadn't already secured it. These boats are often quite distinctive. While larger wooden vessels existed, especially for trade along the main rivers, many everyday fishing boats and local transport craft were made from reeds. Bundles of reeds were tightly bound together to form graceful, shallow-draft boats called kuffas, a type of coracle. Round and basket-like, often waterproofed with bitumen, or longer, canoe-like vessels. They are surprisingly buoyant and maneuverable in the shallows and marshes. Imagine gliding silently through the reed beds in one of these, the water lapping gently against the hull. A scene that has remained largely unchanged in the marshy regions of southern Iraq for millennia. It's a testament to making the most of readily available local materials. No fiberglass or outboard motors here, just ancient ingenuity and a deep understanding of the river's ways. The rivers are, first and foremost, a source of life. Their waters, diverted through an intricate network of canals, are what make agriculture possible in this otherwise arid region. A mainstream historical fact is that Mesopotamian civilization was built upon sophisticated irrigation techniques. Farmers painstakingly dug and maintained these canals, from large, state-managed waterways to smaller, privately owned ditches, to bring precious water to their fields of barley, wheat, sesame, and date palms. Without this irrigation, there would be no surplus crops. No cities, no scribes arguing about syntax, none of the complex society we've been exploring. You'd see farmers, even now in the cooler part of the late afternoon, perhaps checking their sluice gates, clearing channels, or preparing for the next day's watering. It's constant, demanding work, often a source of cooperation between communities, but also, inevitably, a source of disputes over water rights. Water everywhere, but not a drop for my field unless my neighbor opens his gate, was probably a common, if unrecorded, lament. The rivers also provide food. Fishing, as we've seen, is a vital occupation. They used nets, spears, and hooks and lines, much like fishermen today. Though their tackle was made from natural materials like flax, reeds, and bone. The marshes and riverbanks also teemed with waterfowl, ducks and geese, which were hunted or trapped, adding variety to the diet. And, of course, the rivers provided drinking water for humans and animals, and clay for bricks and pottery, the very building blocks of your world. Transport is another crucial blessing. The Tigris and Euphrates, along with their network of canals, served as the highways of ancient Mesopotamia. Bulky goods like grain, timber, which had to be imported from mountainous regions, stone, and metals could be transported far more easily and efficiently by boat than overland by donkey caravan. You'd see barges laden with goods moving slowly along the larger waterways, pulled or sailed if the wind was favorable, connecting distant cities and regions, facilitating the trade that brought those exotic items like lapis lazuli to the marketplaces of Ur. It's the ancient world's shipping and logistics network, powered by currents and muscle. But the rivers are not always benevolent. They are also a source of considerable anxiety and, at times, outright devastation. The most significant burden is the threat of floods. Unlike the relatively predictable annual flooding of the Nile in Egypt, the Tigris and Euphrates could be erratic and violent. Heavy rains in the northern mountains or sudden snowmelt could send a torrent of water surging downstream, inundating fields, destroying crops, sweeping away homes, and drowning livestock and people. These catastrophic floods were a terrifying and recurring feature of Mesopotamian life, often interpreted as signs of divine anger. The Sumerian king list, an ancient text, even speaks of a great flood before which kingship was lowered from heaven, an event that has drawn comparisons to the biblical story of Noah. Imagine the terror of seeing the river, your source of life, suddenly transform into a raging, destructive monster. There were no sophisticated early warning systems, just the desperate hope that the dikes and levees would hold. Historians still argue about the long-term environmental impact of Mesopotamian irrigation practices. While essential for agriculture, intensive irrigation in an arid climate can lead to salinization, the buildup of salt in the soil as water evaporates, which can gradually reduce crop yields. Some scholars suggest this was a contributing factor to the decline of Sumerian city-states in the south and the northward shift of power in later Mesopotamian history. It's a sobering thought that even these ancient innovators might have inadvertently sown the seeds of future problems. A reminder of the delicate balance between human needs and environmental sustainability. And what about hygiene in a world so reliant on, yet also potentially polluted by, these rivers and canals? Well, it was a mixed bag. As we touched upon when you first woke up, washing was part of the daily routine. People would use river or canal water for bathing and laundry. However, these same water sources were also used for waste disposal. No modern sewage systems, remember, irrigation runoff carrying animal waste from fields, and various industrial processes. So, waterborne diseases were likely a constant health challenge. They didn't understand germ theory, but they probably made connections between fouled water and illness. There's evidence of attempts to dig wells for cleaner drinking water, and perhaps some awareness of letting sediment settle out of stored water. Some texts mention soap-like substances made from alkali, from ashes, and oil, used for cleaning textiles and possibly for personal hygiene, though it wouldn't have been the fragrant, lathering soap you're used to. It's probably best not to think too hard about what might have been floating in your bathwater. Ignorance, in this case, might have been a slight, very slight, bliss. One quirky tidbit related to river life is the use of bitumen. This naturally occurring asphalt, which seeps from the ground in various parts of Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq is still rich in oil, and bitumen was an incredibly useful material. It was used to waterproof boats, like those kuffas, line baskets, seal joints in drains and water channels, and even as an adhesive. It's a sticky, black, versatile substance that played a surprisingly important, if humble, role in many aspects of daily life, helping to manage and utilize the vital water resources. Think of it as the ancient world's duct tape, incredibly handy for all sorts of things. So, as twilight begins to settle over the land, and the stars begin to prick the darkening sky, you stand by the water's edge. The river flows on, a powerful, timeless presence. It has brought abundance to your city, fed its people, carried its commerce. It has also brought sorrow and destruction. It demands respect, constant vigilance, and endless labor. It is the defining feature of your world, a source of both profound blessings and ever-present burdens, shaping not just the physical landscape, but the very mindset and resilience of the people who call Mesopotamia home. The last vestiges of daylight are now surrendering to the deepening velvet of night. You've contemplated the immense power of the Tigris and Euphrates, those twin rivers that both nurture and threaten your world. Now, as true darkness enfolds the city of Ur, a different kind of life begins to stir within its mud brick walls. The labors of the day are mostly done, the tools set aside, the market stalls shuttered. It's time to gather with family, to share the main meal of the day, and perhaps, if you're fortunate, to enjoy some entertainment, a welcome respite and a chance to connect after a long day under the Mesopotamian sun. Welcome to Evening in UR, where feasts can be festive and tunes can be timeless. Back in your home, the small oil lamp, a simple clay dish with a wick, fueled by sesame oil or animal fat, casts flickering shadows on the walls, creating a cozy, if somewhat dim, atmosphere. The hearth, which cooked your breakfast porridge all those hours ago, is likely blazing again, or perhaps an outdoor tanner oven is radiating a comforting warmth as the evening meal is prepared. This isn't the quick, light repast you had at midday. Dinner is typically the most substantial meal. A time for the family to come together and share the fruits of their labor, or their bartering skills at the market. Those fish and onions you acquired are about to have their moment. What's on the menu for this Mesopotamian dinner? Well, it varies greatly depending on your family's wealth and status. For many, it would still be based around those reliable staples, barley. Perhaps in the form of thicker bread or savory porridge, and vegetables. But the evening meal is where you might see a bit more variety. Remember those fish you brought home? They might be grilled over the embers, seasoned with a bit of salt and perhaps some herbs found growing wild. Or they could be simmered in a stew with those onions, leeks, and whatever other vegetables are on hand, lentils, chickpeas, or beans, all good sources of protein. A bit of garlic, a highly prized flavoring, might be added if you can get it. If your family is a bit more prosperous, or if it's a special occasion, meat might grace the table. Mutton, sheep, and goat were the most common meats, usually stewed or roasted. Beef was less common and more of a luxury, typically reserved for the wealthy or for temple sacrifices, from which the meat was often redistributed. As we discussed with those divine room service meals. Birds, like ducks and pigeons, could also be roasted or added to stews. These stews, or tu, were a mainstay of Mesopotamian cuisine. Often slow-cooked in clay pots, allowing tougher cuts of meat to become tender and flavors to meld. They'd be scooped up with pieces of flatbread. Forget your forks and knives. Fingers and bread are your primary utensils. It's a messy but satisfying way to eat. One popular dish mentioned in texts involved simmering meat with licorice, which sounds interesting. Perhaps an acquired taste, like some modern culinary experiments I could mention but won't, in the interest of keeping things PG-13. And, of course, there's beer. The evening meal would certainly be accompanied by kvass, that ever-present Mesopotamian brew. Perhaps a slightly better quality for the evening, or maybe just a larger ration after a hard day's work. Wine, made from dates or grapes, though grape wine was more of a luxury, often imported, might also be enjoyed by those who could afford it. Now, if you were dining in the palace, remember that brief, intimidating visit, or in the home of a wealthy merchant or high priest, the evening feast would be a far more elaborate affair. Multiple courses, a greater variety of meats and exotic ingredients, finely crafted serving vessels, and perhaps even professional entertainers. A mainstream historical fact is that Mesopotamian cuisine, at least for the elite, could be quite sophisticated. Cuneiform tablets from the Old Babylonian period, around 1700 BCE, found at Yale University contain what are considered the world's oldest known cooking recipes. Detailing complex dishes with specific ingredients and preparation methods for various meat and vegetable stews. These weren't just throw it all in a pot recipes, they involved multiple steps, specific seasonings, and an understanding of how flavors combine. So, they weren't just surviving on barley porridge, some folks were serious foodies. Once the meal is finished, and the last scraps of bread have been used to wipe the clay bowls clean, what then? This is when the festive tunes and storytelling might come into play, especially if it's a special occasion. A religious festival, or simply a night when the mood is right. Music, as we touched upon during our discussion of temple festivals, was not confined to grand public ceremonies. In the evenings, in homes or courtyards, families and neighbors might gather to listen to music or make it themselves. Someone might bring out a simple reed flute and play a plaintive melody that drifts through the cool night air. Or perhaps there's a small harp or lyre in the household. These stringed instruments, often beautifully crafted with sound boxes decorated with inlaid shell or precious stones, if you were fancy, could produce enchanting music. The famous lyres found in the royal tombs of Ur, with their bull-headed decorations, are stunning examples of Mesopotamian craftsmanship and attest to the importance of music in their culture. While you probably don't have a gold-plated bull lyre in your humble home, simpler versions would have existed. Drums and tambourines might provide a rhythmic accompaniment, inviting people to clap, sing, or even dance in the confined space of a courtyard. Storytelling was another cherished evening pastime. In a world where literacy was limited, oral tradition was king. Professional storytellers might wander from city to city, or even within neighborhoods, recounting epic tales of gods, heroes, and ancient kings. The Epic of Gilgamesh, with its themes of friendship, adventure, mortality, and the search for meaning, would have been a captivating story, passed down through generations long before it was written on those clay tablets by diligent scribes. Imagine huddling around the dim lamplight, listening wide-eyed as a skilled narrator brings these ancient characters and their incredible adventures to life. It's the original Netflix, but with no buffering and way more audience participation. Even if there isn't a professional storyteller or accomplished musician present, families would share their own stories, recount the day's events, tell jokes, or recite proverbs and traditional wisdom. Children would listen to their elders, absorbing the cultural values and history of their people. It's a time for connection, for reinforcing social bonds, and for passing on knowledge. One quirky tidbit is the Mesopotamian love for riddles and proverbs. Many have been preserved on cuneiform tablets, and they offer a fascinating glimpse into their way of thinking and their sense of humor. Some riddles are quite clever, while others are, well, let's just say humor doesn't always translate perfectly across millennia. For example, he whose eyes are not open enters it. He whose eyes are wide open comes out of it. What is it? The answer? A fish net. Get it? Yeah, maybe it loses something in translation or without a few mugs of that strong Mesopotamian beer. with aromatic plant materials. Think flowers like lilies or irises, fragrant woods such as cedar or cypress, resins like myrrh and frankincense, often imported and very valuable, and spices like cinnamon or cardamom. The process of extracting these scents could be quite involved, sometimes using a form of distillation or pressing. The resulting fragrant oils would be applied to the skin and hair, making you smell a whole lot more appealing than your unadorned self. A mainstream historical fact is that Mesopotamians were skilled perfumers, and recipes for making various scented oils have been found on cuneiform tablets. These weren't just for smelling nice, perfumes also had religious and medicinal uses, often employed in temple rituals or to anoint the sick. Imagine dabbing a bit of cedar-scented oil on your wrists or running a fragrant comb through your hair. It's a little touch of luxury, a way to feel more refined and attractive. For the wealthy, these perfumes could be incredibly exotic and expensive, housed in beautifully crafted containers made of alabaster, faience, a type of glazed ceramic, or even precious metal. For the average person, it might be a simpler, locally produced scented oil, but the desire to smell good is pretty universal. It's funny how, even millennia ago, people were trying to find a signature scent. Probably less essence of teen spirit and more eau de Euphrates bloom. Now, let's talk about paints, or what we would call cosmetics. Yes, makeup is not a modern invention. Mesopotamians, both men and women, used various substances to enhance their features, particularly their eyes. The most common cosmetic was kohl, a dark powder used as eyeliner and to darken eyelashes and eyebrows. Kohl was typically made from galena, lead sulfide, stibnite, antimony sulfide, or soot, from lamps or burnt almonds, ground into a fine powder and then mixed with a bit of oil or animal fat to make a paste. It was applied with a small stick or applicator, often made of wood, bone, or ivory. This dark eyeliner wasn't just for beauty, it was also believed to have protective qualities, warding off eye infections and the dreaded evil eye. It also helped reduce the glare of the bright Mesopotamian sun, a bit like ancient sunglasses built right into your face. So, that dramatic, heavily lined eye look you see in ancient Egyptian and Mesopotamian art? Totally intentional, and multi-purpose. Beyond kohl, other pigments were used. Green eye paint, made from malachite, a copper carbonate mineral, was also popular. For the lips and cheeks, red ochre, a naturally occurring iron oxide clay, could provide a reddish tint. White powders, perhaps made from gypsum or chalk, might have been used to lighten the complexion or as a base. These cosmetics would be stored in small pots, shells, or containers, and applying them would have been a familiar ritual before an important social gathering. It's a bit like your modern makeup routine, just with slightly more lead and fewer YouTube tutorials to guide you. One quirky tidbit is that some Mesopotamian cosmetic containers were quite elaborate, sometimes shaped like animals or with intricate carvings. It suggests that the tools and containers for beauty were themselves considered objects of art and status. You wouldn't just keep your fancy kohl in any old pot, it deserved a special home. Historians still argue about the exact recipes and range of cosmetics used, as direct archaeological evidence of the substances themselves can be rare, but artistic depictions and textual references provide strong clues. So, you've got your fragrant oils on. Your eyes are dramatically lined with kohl, maybe a touch of red ochre on your lips. What about the party garb? For special evening occasions, you'd certainly want to wear your best attire. This wouldn't necessarily mean a completely different style of clothing from your daily wear, but rather a finer quality version of it. If your usual tunic is made of coarse wool, your party tunic might be of soft, bleached linen, perhaps dyed a pleasing color if you can afford it. Fringes, embroidery, and decorative woven borders would add a touch of elegance. We saw those skilled weavers back in section 8, this is where their more elaborate creations would shine. Remember the kaunakes, that fleecy or tufted garment? That might have been considered special occasion wear, especially in earlier periods. In later Assyrian and Babylonian times, long, flowing robes with intricate patterns and rich colors became fashionable for the elite. These garments would be draped and pinned in elegant ways, perhaps with a decorative belt or sash to cinch the waist. It's all about looking a bit more put together, a bit more prosperous, and showing respect for your hosts and the occasion. No showing up to a wedding feast in your equivalent of sweatpants, thank you very much. Jewelry, of course, played a huge role in dressing up. Those necklaces, bracelets, earrings, and rings we talked about earlier would be brought out and proudly displayed. Gold, silver, lapis lazuli, and carnelian would gleam in the lamplight, adding sparkle and status. Even if your jewelry was simpler, polished stones or shell beads, you'd wear your best pieces. Headbands, hair ornaments of gold or silver wire, and decorative pins would complete the ensemble. It's the ancient equivalent of putting on your statement necklace or your favorite cufflinks. Hairstyles, already important as we discussed, would receive extra attention. If you were a man with a long beard, it would be meticulously groomed and perhaps scented. Women might arrange their hair in more elaborate braids or updos, possibly incorporating fresh flowers or ribbons. A well-coiffed head was a sign of good grooming and sophistication. So, imagine yourself now, ready for this special evening. You're smelling faintly of cedar and myrrh, your eyes are alluringly defined with kohl, and you're wearing your finest, cleanest linen garment, adorned with whatever jewelry you possess. You feel good. You look good, by ancient Mesopotamian standards, at least. It's a transformation, a way of shedding the grime and toil of the day and stepping into a more festive, social role. These rituals of adornment, however simple or elaborate, are about more than just vanity, they are about self-expression, social signaling, and participating in the communal joy of a shared celebration. As you step out into the evening, ready to join the festivities, you carry with you not just your own personal charm, but also the ancient human desire to connect, to celebrate, and to look your best while doing it. Stepping out into the Mesopotamian night, perhaps after enjoying that festive gathering we imagined. Adorned in your finest, or at least cleanest, attire and subtly scented with those ancient perfumes, you'd inevitably be struck by the sheer magnificence of the sky above. Away from the flickering oil lamps of the houses and the occasional torchlight in a main thoroughfare, the darkness is profound. And in that darkness, the stars don't just twinkle, they blaze. They seem close enough to touch, scattered like diamond dust across an immense black canvas. In a world without our modern light pollution, the night sky was a daily spectacle, a source of wonder. And, for the Mesopotamians, a vital source of information and divine communication. Forget your astronomy apps or planetarium projectors, this is stargazing in its purest, most primal form. You can see the Milky Way arching overhead, a shimmering river of stars. Familiar constellations, though perhaps known by different names and stories, will slowly across the heavens as the night progresses. The moon, if it's visible, would be a captivating presence, its phases carefully observed and tracked. Planets. Those wandering stars that moved differently from the fixed constellations were objects of intense interest and scrutiny. This isn't just a pretty view, for the Mesopotamians. The night sky was a vast, celestial tablet upon which the gods wrote their intentions. A mainstream historical fact is that Mesopotamian astronomers, particularly the Babylonians, were meticulous observers of the heavens. They kept detailed records of astronomical phenomena, including the movements of the sun, moon, and planets, the appearances of comets and eclipses, often inscribed on those trusty cuneiform tablets. These records, compiled over centuries, allowed them to develop sophisticated mathematical astronomy, enabling them to predict certain celestial events with remarkable accuracy. They identified many constellations still recognized today, though the mythological figures associated with them were their own, mapped the zodiac, and developed calendrical systems based on lunar and solar cycles to regulate agriculture and religious festivals. Their contributions laid foundational groundwork for later Greek and Western astronomy. So, when you check your horoscope, don't worry, I won't tell, you're tapping into a tradition that has very deep roots in the land between the rivers. But for the average Mesopotamian, and indeed for the official sky watchers, or Tupseru Enuma Anu Enlil, scribes of when Anu and Enlil, a major omen series, the primary purpose of observing the heavens was not purely scientific curiosity in our modern sense. It was all about divination, about reading the numinous signs. They believed that events in the sky, the behavior of the moon, the path of a planet, an unexpected meteor shower, or a solar or lunar eclipse, were omens. Messages from the gods indicating future events on Earth, particularly those affecting the king and the state. If the moon had a certain halo, or if Mars, the fiery star, appeared particularly bright in a certain part of the sky, it could portend war, famine, a good harvest, or the death of a ruler. It was a cosmic weather report. But instead of predicting rain, it was predicting, doom or glory. Imagine the priest astronomers, night after night. Perhaps from the top of a ziggurat, those step temple towers we've mentioned, which would have offered an excellent, unobstructed view of the sky, or a dedicated observation platform. They would carefully note down everything they saw, comparing their observations to vast libraries of previously recorded omens. If a comet appears in the path of the star Anu, the king will die and his land will be diminished. If Venus is visible in the east in the month of Ajaru, there will be a slaughter of the enemy. These omen texts were incredibly detailed and comprehensive, covering a vast range of celestial possibilities. It's like they had a celestial, if this, then that, for everything the sky could possibly throw at them. This belief in celestial omens had a profound impact on decision-making, especially at the state level. Kings would anxiously await reports from their astronomers. A particularly ominous celestial event could lead to the postponement of a military campaign, the performance of elaborate apotropaic rituals, to ward off evil, or even, as we touched upon briefly in the context of substitute kings, the temporary replacement of the king to divert divine wrath. Historians still argue about the degree to which these omens dictated policy versus being used to legitimize decisions already made. But their perceived importance is undeniable. It's a heavy responsibility, being a royal astronomer, get your forecast wrong, and it's not just egg on your face. It could be a national disaster, or at least, you'd be blamed for it. What about the common person, like you, standing there in the cool night air, gazing upwards? While you might not be privy to the complex interpretations of the state astronomers, you too would have an awareness of the sky's significance. Folk beliefs about lucky and unlucky days, the meanings of certain stars, or the phases of the moon would have been widespread. The moon, in particular, associated with the god Nana/Sin in Ur, was a powerful and visible regulator of time and life. Its waxing and waning were a constant reminder of cycles of growth, decay, and renewal. You might offer a small prayer to a particular star or constellation known to be benevolent, or feel a shiver of apprehension if you saw something unusual or unsettling in the night sky. One quirky tidbit is that the Mesopotamians associated various gods with specific planets. For example, Jupiter was often identified with Marduk, the chief god of Babylon, Venus with Ishtar, Inanna, goddess of love and war, Mars with Nergal, god of plague and the underworld, Mercury with Nabu, god of wisdom and writing, and Saturn with Ninurta, a god of war and agriculture. These associations imbued the movements of the planets with divine personality and intent, making their celestial dance a drama of cosmic proportions. It's like watching a slow-motion soap opera played out by deities across the heavens. Oh look, Ishtar is getting a bit too close to Nergal tonight, that can't be good for international relations. The Mesopotamian understanding of the cosmos was, naturally, geocentric. The earth was seen as a flat disk, floating in a vast freshwater ocean, with the heavens as a solid dome or series of domes above it, beyond which resided the gods in their celestial palaces. The stars were thought to be fixed to these heavenly vaults, while the sun, moon, and planets moved in prescribed paths. They had elaborate creation myths, like the Enuma Elish, which described how the universe and the order of the cosmos were established through divine battles and acts of creation. This worldview provided a framework for understanding their place in the universe, with humanity situated between the earthly realm and the powerful, often inscrutable, domain of the gods above. So, as you stand there, beneath the immensity of the Mesopotamian night sky, you are not just an idle observer. You are part of a culture that looked to the heavens for meaning, for guidance, and for warnings. The stars are not just distant balls of fire, they are the script of the gods, a source of constant fascination and sometimes, profound dread. The silence of the night is broken only by the soft rustling of wind in the reeds by the distant river, or the occasional chirp of a cricket. The air is cool and clear. It's a moment for reflection. Perhaps a little awe, as you contemplate your own small existence under this vast, star-dusted canopy, a canopy that has watched over your ancestors and will watch over your descendants. It's silent, twinkling pronouncements shaping the destiny of kings and commoners alike. The vast, star-strewn Mesopotamian sky, with its divine messages and silent grandeur, has held your gaze. But now, a deep weariness, born from a long day of toils, trades, and perhaps even a bit of festive adornment, begins to settle over you. The city of Ur is truly quiet now, save for the occasional night sounds, the hoot of an owl, the distant howl of a desert dog, or the soft murmur of a family settling down next door. It's time to retreat from the immensity of the cosmos and prepare for the more intimate journey into slumber and the mysterious realm of dreamscapes. Back inside your mud brick home, the single oil lamp, which casts such lively shadows during your evening meal and storytelling, is probably burning low. Fuel is precious, and it won't be left to gutter all night. Your family begins the simple rituals of preparing for bed. There's no elaborate routine of brushing teeth. to avert the foreseen evil. It's like having a divine spoiler alert system. But you need a manual and a priest to figure out what it means. The gods themselves were believed to communicate through dreams. A particularly important dream might even be sought deliberately through incubation rituals, sleeping in a sacred place, like a temple, in the hope of receiving divine guidance. Kings and rulers especially paid close attention to their dreams, as they were often seen as pertaining to the fate of the entire land. The Epic of Gilgamesh, that cornerstone of Mesopotamian literature, features several significant dreams that foreshadow future events and guide the hero's actions. So, as you drift off, you might find yourself hoping for good dreams, for messages of prosperity and health, or perhaps just for a peaceful, undisturbed night. The content of your dreams would be shaped by your daily experiences, your anxieties, your hopes. You might dream of bountiful harvests, successful trades in the marketplace, or perhaps the terrifying roar of a flooding river. You might even dream of the gods themselves, majestic and awe-inspiring, or perhaps a bit grumpy if you forgot that extra offering. Historians still argue about the psychological versus purely divinatory understanding of dreams in Mesopotamia, while the emphasis was certainly on their predictive nature. There seems to have been some awareness that dreams could also reflect an individual's emotional state or unresolved issues. It's a complex interplay that scholars continue to explore. One quirky tidbit is that there were even rituals to send a dream to someone else, or to protect oneself from bad dreams sent by an enemy. This suggests a belief that dreams could be actively manipulated or used as a form of psychic attack. So, if you had a particularly annoying neighbor, you couldn't just egg their house. Perhaps you'd try to send them a nightmare about their prize goat developing a sudden passion for opera. Less messy, but probably just as effective in terms of neighborhood relations. The night in Ur is deep now. The last embers in the hearth have died down. The city sleeps, a collective sigh of humanity at rest. Your breathing deepens, your body relaxes into the mat. The boundary between the waking world and the dreamscape begins to blur. You are entering a realm where the gods might whisper secrets, where the future might be glimpsed in symbolic flashes, or where your mind simply processes the myriad impressions of another day lived in this ancient, vibrant land. As your consciousness surrenders to the embrace of sleep, you become another sleeping form in a city of sleepers, all bound together by the shared human need for rest and renewal. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges, its own labors, its own small joys. But for now, there is only the quiet dark, the gentle rhythm of your own breath, and the silent, unfolding mystery of your Mesopotamian dreams. Word count, 2,287. The city of Ur. And indeed the whole of Mesopotamia, now lies quiet under the vast, starlit canopy that has witnessed so much of its history. You've walked its dusty streets, tasted its hearty bread and beer, haggled in its bustling markets, and felt the spiritual pulse that throbbed from its towering ziggurats. You've glimpsed the artistry of its craftsmen, the complexities of its palace life, the simple joys of its children, and the ever-present influence of its life-giving, life-threatening rivers. You've adorned yourself for festive evenings and pondered the celestial messages whispered by the night sky. Now, as our journey through a day in ancient Mesopotamia gently comes to a close, allow the images to soften, the sounds to fade. Let the concerns of barley harvests and divine omens recede like the tide on the river flats. Feel the deep, restorative peace of this ancient night settling around you, a quietude earned after a long day's immersion in a world so distant, yet so fundamentally human. There are no more tasks to complete, no more rituals to observe, only the profound stillness that precedes a new dawn. The clay tablets hold their secrets for another day, the artisan's tools lie silent, and even the gods seem to rest. Let the gentle cadence of this story lull you further into tranquility, carrying you toward your own peaceful dreamscape, far from the land between the rivers, into the quiet sanctuary of your own slumber.